Hello and welcome back to Rocking Chair Society. If you're new to the channel, I'm Sylvia. Thank you for tuning in. This is Lucky, aka Dennis the Menace. Sometimes he likes to make an appearance. I'm so delighted to share with you about another unsung hero. He was a member of the Martineau family. You remember Martineau episodes from before? Emil and Lavinia were his parents, and his one sister, Evelyn. So we have previous videos featuring them. They are part of the Amazing or Exceptional People series. Ed is an unsung hero, and we'll learn about that more. A few things. Ed married my aunt, one of my aunts, and she was a divorced mother with 3 small children. She struggled. She was a waitress and only had sporadic support from the children's father. I once heard her say that her name was Martineau. I called her Aunt Marge. Aunt Marge once told me that she would take her tips from waitressing and give to the kids so that they would have money for their school lunches. And her kids were helpful. The oldest, Dwayne, followed by Harold, Hoppy, would take care of their own school clothes. They would iron them. They would get them ready. So they did their bit. They knew their mother needed help. Ed took on this family, Martineau and her 3 small children, and embraced them. He treated them like his own children. He loved them, and he was very instrumental in their upbringing. So I can think of a few more reasons why he was so exceptional and why he was the unsung hero, although taking on a ready-made family could be reason enough to be considered an unsung hero. He was a very good house painter. He learned from a former father-in-law of his. Uncle Ed told me that he, when his father-in-law, Mr. Whiteman, was teaching him to paint for the very first year, he did not touch a bit of brush and paint. He only did prep work for the first year. So that was a very interesting apprenticeship, but probably a very valuable one, because Uncle Ed turned out to be an excellent house painter. That's how he made his living, and he was sought after. He did not have to advertise, and I know at one point he had a waiting list of clients, customers, waiting with a 1-year waiting list. So he was that good. Occasionally I would help him, but I'll touch on that a little bit more. He was also a very good boat builder. I remember in the shop behind their little 2-bedroom home, he built a boat, a catamaran, built it from scratch. He put an engine in it and took it out to Lake George, where he participated in the boat races. I don't know if he ever won, but I know it had to be a lot of fun. Lake George is a very large lake to the east of Ocala. It's between Ocala and the Atlantic Ocean. So he made other things out of wood, and he enjoyed giving them as gifts. So, do you remember the earlier videos about the Martineaus? Ed was the fourth child born to Emil and Lavinia. Of course, he had the one sister, Evelyn. Older than him were Art and Joe. They were born in Michigan and came down. Mr. and Mrs. Martineau came down 1951. I'm not real sure when Ed, if he came back and forth a little bit, because they had relatives in Florida also before that. I remember Uncle Ed mentioning that he went to a dance, and that is where he first met my Aunt Martineau. She was pregnant with her third child, Betty, and they both enjoyed dancing. Years later, they were to meet up again and get married. So that's when he took on this ready-made family. Good man he was. Ed and his brother Joe married sisters. One was Maxine, the other Mabel. Ed married Mabel. In 1952, Ed and Mabel divorced. In his father's eyes, Emil's eyes, that was a big no-no. Emil remembered how staunchly his own parents stayed together, even though they hated each other. In fact, they lived in 2 different countries. Emil's father was in Quebec, and his mother moved into New England. His father would visit the mother in New England once a year, and she would become pregnant. He insisted that his children be born in Quebec, so when it was close to time for Emil's mother to deliver, she would go back into Canada. So even though Emil's parents hated each other, they never divorced. And that pretty well stuck with Emil. So in 1952, Ed was divorced. He was here in Florida. He probably needed some help. He went to his parents' house. His mother raced out into the front yard where he was, met him in the front yard, and very discreetly gave him some money so that her husband, Emil, would not be able to see her do that. 2 years later, Joe and Maxine divorced. In fact, eventually, all of Emil's children divorced, except for one. That was Paul. So Mr. Martineau had to change his mind about divorced kids, divorced people, because he obviously did, because he had a very good relationship with all of his children. So Aunt Marge, had the 3 children from her previous marriage. She and Ed married in 1956. The next year, they had a child together, Reva. Reva was a very sickly child. Really, since there was only a 2-bedroom house there, Betty decided to go live with her father and her stepmom. But we'd still see Betty on weekends. Summer, we saw her frequently. I thought of Betty as a very close sister cousin. Hoppy, when he was 17, decided he needed to go into the Army. One enticement was that he had been told that he would be able to choose his career path. So that sounded very advantageous, and he hounded his mother until she agreed. He was 17. After his training, which included jump school, he was shipped to Vietnam. On November the 8th, he was killed by enemy fire. It was November the 8th, 1965. He and quite a few other people in his group were killed. In fact, there was a song by Brooks and Dunn about the 8th of November. Hoppy Harold Golden. 15 years later, Dwayne owned a grocery store in Gainesville, Florida. He was shot and killed in front of his store. We never learned why he was shot and killed. My aunt never got over the loss of her two sons. Betty grew up and married, had a daughter. It was a very brief marriage. Betty eventually met and married an engineer for a racing organization out of Reading, Pennsylvania. After the wedding, she and her daughter moved to Reading, Pennsylvania. That's where they spent many years. On a trip with the race teams to the west coast of the U.S. and Canada, winding up in California, Betty and the other wives were planning on going on a shopping trip. Betty had a horrific headache and told the others to go on without her. When they returned, they discovered Betty unconscious. She had had a brain bleed followed by strokes. She was very bad off. Years later, Betty told me that on a daily basis, one of the doctors would go to Betty's husband and see if he wanted to basically let her slip away. In fact, the doctor would say something like, when they're this bad, we usually let them slip away. Jerry told the doctor, well, we're not going to let this one slip away. Jerry was very instrumental in overseeing Betty's therapy, her return to some sort of normalcy in life. In fact, she made a miraculous recovery. She had paralysis. She had to relearn everything, how to talk, how to read. She eventually was able to drive, and drive quite well. She took care of a rather sizable home, the cleaning, and they had oodles of cats, and she took care of them. What an extraordinary person. Back a couple of years ago, Betty contracted lung cancer, inoperable, and eventually she passed away. So Ed, my Aunt Marge, and the three oldest kids have all passed away now. But Reva is with us. She is a very healthy individual, a very hardy individual. She also is a testament to survival. One of the ways that I know a good bit of Ed's story is back in the 80s and early 90s, I was working a job that had periodic layoffs. Being a single mother myself, I needed extra income. He allowed me to work with him as his helper. What I did was prepping. I did a lot of cleaning, cleanup, sanding, scraping, preparing things for him to paint. It was pretty hard work, and I was always grateful to go back to my regular work so I could recuperate. But he was a good boss. The time that I had during break time and travel time, it just reinforced what a good person he was. And I had an opportunity to learn a lot from him, a lot about his past. Next time, we'll just have to figure out who we're going to feature, what we're going to talk about. But once again, Edmund Paul Martineau, I hope you're taking the time to do your meditate and reflect and sort things, because we're certainly bombarded with so much news. Sometimes it's hard to understand what to believe. Sometimes we're just so inundated with things that we really don't have time to think about the things that we need to be thinking about. So I hope you join me next time, but get some rocking in. Enjoy that meditative time. So be well and keep on rocking.